You know, something I thought about early this morning while I was getting ready and prepping this video and doing my thing. I was wondering who has the better musical catalog? Is it Cameron, who I love? I love me some Killer Cam straight out of Harlem, USA. Or is it my guy Jadakiss? I don't know. I love me some Jada. I mean, listen, Jada has the songs with B.I.G. Rest in peace to B.I. Rest in peace to Big. He does have classics with Big. But Cameron also got them joints too. Anyway, let's talk about this versus matchup between the LOX and Dipset. This is going to be a good one. This is for the streets, y'all. Let's talk about it.
D-Block, 2 guns up, as usual.
We're going to set it off. We're going to set the tone of this one right here. I'm going with the LOX, the LOX and D-Block. Why? Well, listen, the LOX, and this is my full belief that this truly should have been a versus battle between G-Unit and Dipset. But we all know the history of 50 Cent and G-Unit not getting along. We all know the history of him and Lloyd Banks and Young Buck, and you know, Tony Yayo seems always cool with 50, but we all know that history. But then we know the history, the bad blood, or sort of a little bit of turmoil, a little bit of, you know, not so much camaraderie between 50 and Jim Jones. You know, at one point 50 and Cam was going at it, but they have since reconciled. And so I don't know, this really should have been G-Unit versus Dipset. And you know, this could have really actually been a three-way dance and a triple threat matchup. And it could have been G-Unit versus D-Block, the LOX versus Dipset, because in the early 2000s, you know, G-Unit, 50 and Cam and Dipset and the LOX, you know, D-Block, they were running the mixtape game. You couldn't literally go up the block or inside a corner store or inside, you know, your local one stop or wherever you go and not see, or wherever you went or in the record store to purchase mixtapes, mix CDs. There were literally albums loads and just shelves and glass casing full of Dipset and G-Unit and D-Block and LOX, the LOX mixed CDs. And this was a great era in hip hop, the early 2000s, between roughly 2001, 2002, all the way up until like 2006. And, you know, D-Block, you know, the LOX, they were just running the game. When you talk about whose mixtapes were better, I tend to lean towards the LOX. Super Mario, he had the mixtape game on Smash. Super. With those LOX releases. I mean, it was, you know, the LOX, you know, Styles P was coming out with mixed joints. One of my favorite albums that literally dropped in the early 2000s was Styles P mixtapes, with his mixtape Ghost in a Shell. I thought that was a classic mixtape, one of my favorites. Chic Luch was consistently dropping dope mixtapes. Now, when we talking about songs, so on the mixtape level, on the underground hip hop scene mixtape level, we talking about, it's more, you know, a little bit more even as far as the game. You know, I'm gonna give it to the LOX, but I think that Dipset had their major run too with their mixtapes. We cannot, and this is the thing right here, this is where it gets a little tricky, because I feel that the other members of Dipset that might not be, we all hope that all the members of Dipset will be in attendance at this versus. But the way it looks like they're billing this versus is Dipset, meaning Cameron, Juelz Santana, and Jim Jones. Those three. When, to me personally, the heart, the soul, and the backbone of Dipset was Hell Rell and J.R. Writer. I mean, they were literally the Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs of Dipset. You know, you can't think back to Dipset of the early 2000s without thinking of Hell Rell, who was a very dope lyricist, and J.R. Writer. His pen game was and still is crazy. If you don't believe me, y'all don't believe me. You don't believe me. Come on. Yeah, they don't believe me.
I'm a communist. Listen, my accomplishments are monuments and compliments. Bowling on my enemies, opulence and confidence. Do not attempt to ever compare me. Nigga, I am him. You tryna log in but don't got the pen. Try again. Every time I go to flex, what you hear? Not again. Bars like a fresh breath of air. Oxygen, get washed and rinsed at the laundromat. Where the laundry at? These artifacts, and they ain't just artifacts. These are the facts. Y'all only good for honorable mentions. With your garbage raps, I'm smoking everybody attending. It's a party pack.
J.R. Writer is still nice with it. Hell Rell and J.I. Ryder were the two lyricists out of the group next to Cam. Other than that, Joel Santana, you know, his body of work is really not that long and extensive, pause. You know, he doesn't have a vast catalog and body of work. He really only has that one album, that hit that he came out with that had the whistle song on it. That was a mild radio hit. He had a couple other joints on there as well. So Joel's has basically that one album. Now, when it comes to hits and the radio joints, official albums, if we talking hits, we got Cameron, Joel's had a couple joints, and then, you know, Jim Jones had his early success. He's welcoming in a newfound success now because he's gotten more serious with his pen. His beats are elevated, and he's really, you know, taking that next step up in his career. But, you know, Cam was really the one that was coming out with those big hits. Jim Jones had his joints like Ballin'. We all know about that joint. That was probably one of the biggest joints out of the crew. And I also thought Jim Jones' second album, Harlem Diary of a Summer, was a very dope album at the time. But if we going with hits for hit, bangers for bangers, club joints for club joints, I mean, you gotta give it to the LOX. I mean, listen, the LOX had so many joints. It's just like, not only did the LOX have the radio friendly joints, and Dipset did as well with Hey Ma and a couple other joints, but the LOX really, Jadakiss, you know, the LOX got them joints from the 90s. I mean, All About the Benjamins alone was massive. You know, the LOX first album had joints on it, you know, Money, Power, and Respect. And then the LOX, you know, the LOX had F You off they We Are the Streets album. So I mean, both of these groups' catalogs are battling it out. But, you know, if I'm talking about from a pure lyrical standpoint, if we going lyric for lyric, bar for bar, we got Cameron on the Dipset side, Joel's, Jim. You know, I want to include Hellrell and J.I. Ryder, but I don't know if they're going to get included. But lyric for lyric, bar for bar, you got to give it to the LOX. I mean, listen, Jada, you know, even though Jada has had his albums that were kind of like not really, you know, full blown classic albums, you know, a lot of times his albums don't hit like they necessarily should, you know, which they, you know, the last couple haven't. To me, Jada's best album was probably his first album, obviously, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, you got to give it, we going straight off of, you know, lyricism, and, you know, we got to give it to the LOX. I'm giving it to the LOX with Jadakiss, Styles, and Chic. And, you know, we can't forget about Chic and his joints. I mean, Chic had the Kiss Your Ass Goodbye joint. The Beat Is Undefeated. He had the remix with Beanie Siegel, dropped one of his hardest verses ever. So Chic had joints. You know, we comparing the top three in the group, the three LOX and the three members from core members of Dipset. If we comparing Cam and Jadakiss, who's the best? Wow, that's tough. That's tough. I'm not going to answer that on camera. That is tough. Like Jadakiss and Cameron, I never even thought about it. This is something that I didn't even think about before making this video. Who's better, Jadakiss or Cam? Wow, I'm really up here thinking about it. If I have to go, and we can't forget about Cam's Killer Season album, which I brought. I thought that Killer Season soundtrack was very slept on, very good album. Jadakiss or Cam, who's better? Who's better? Whose albums are better? And then we going with Styles P versus Jim Jones. Whose material is better? Solo albums is better. I'm going with Styles P. I'm giving Styles P the edge on that. Just because Styles P is more lyrical, you know, his pen game is much more better than Jim Jones. And, you know, I got to give it to Styles P, honesty. Styles P versus Jim Jones, hands down, I'm giving it to Styles P. And even though I like Jim, I love you, but I got to give pause. I got to give it to Styles. And Chic going up against Joel Santana, obviously Chic. I mean, Joel's has battled his issues, so that kind of hindered him from coming out with music over the last 15 years. So that's Chic, no doubt. So yeah, that's my take on it. You know, of course, I'm leaving out plenty of other things, plenty of other songs, you know, plenty of other tracks. So, you know, you can only do but so much in a quick, basic 5-7 minute verses. Try to preview it, break down it a little bit. I would have to make a part 2 or a part 3 because both groups' careers are so legendary. You know, it's just you can't do it all in 7-8 minutes. So yeah, I'm going with the LOX on this one. Feel free to you know, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Yeah, but you know, I also love Dipset as well. So you know, it's a win-win no matter how you look at it. But I'm giving this to the LOX. Full disclosure. Yo, I'll check y'all later. Peace.